Rain poured down in silver sheets, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and blue. Cars hissed past puddles, reflections trembling like broken glass. Under a flickering street lamp, a woman sat huddled on the curb, her clothes soaked, her arms wrapped around two sleeping children. Their breaths rose like tiny clouds in the cold night air. One of the kids coughed softly, and she pressed his head closer to her chest, whispering something only the rain could hear. Across the street, behind the tinted window of a black car, a man watched. His wristwatch gleamed, the kind that could buy a small house, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. The world had taught him to look away from things that hurt. Yet tonight, he couldn't. Before we dive deeper, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? It amazes me how far a single story can travel. Drop your city. Let's see how wide kindness still spreads. Ethan Hayes wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be at a dinner, champagne, laughter, investors. But halfway through his speech, something in his chest tightened. He'd driven without knowing where, just chasing the rain, until it stopped him here, at this corner, staring at a woman who had nothing but 2 kids and a wet cardboard sign that read, "Hungry. Please help." He hesitated. People don't stop for moments like this. Not men like him. Not with cameras waiting for mistakes. But the way her hand brushed her daughter's cheek, gentle, trembling, protective, cracked something open inside him. He stepped out of the car. Cold water splashed against his leather shoes. The driver called after him, but Ethan didn't turn back. The woman flinched when he knelt beside her. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. "Do you need help?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She only looked down at her children, then back at him, eyes hollow, yet somehow defiant. "Please," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. "They haven't eaten since yesterday." Ethan glanced at the nearest diner, neon sign buzzing weakly through the mist. "Come on," he said, gesturing. "Let's get them something warm." She hesitated, clutching her bag. A torn plastic one filled with nothing but a blanket and a broken toy car. "It's okay," he assured. "You can sit by the window. It's warm there." Inside the diner, the waitress frowned when she saw them. Her eyes darted from Ethan's tailored coat to the barefoot kids. "We're closing soon," she muttered. "Then make it quick," Ethan replied quietly, pulling out his wallet. "Whatever they want." The children's eyes widened as plates arrived, eggs, fries, hot chocolate steaming like miracles. The woman, though, didn't eat. She just stared at them, a smile trembling at the edges of her exhaustion. Ethan sat opposite her, hands clasped. "What's your name?" "Grace," she said. "And these are Lily and Sam." He nodded slowly. "Grace. That's a strong name." She laughed softly, almost ashamed. "Not strong enough, I guess." Her words hung between them, heavier than the rain. Outside, the storm had eased, but inside, something new was forming. Not pity, not charity, but something raw and human. If you were there in that moment, what would you have done? Be honest. Comment your answer below. And if words fail you, just hit like to prove that compassion still matters. When the children finally fell asleep at the booth, Grace leaned back, her eyes tracing the raindrops racing down the glass. "I used to work," she said quietly, almost to herself, "at a store, cashier, full-time. It wasn't much, but it was enough." "What happened?" Ethan asked. "My husband left, took the rent money. The store cut hours. Then Lily got sick." Her fingers trembled as she reached for the cup, but she didn't drink. "I thought I could fix everything." "Moms always think they can." Ethan didn't interrupt. The diner's soft hum filled the silence. Coffee machines, old music, the faint ticking of a clock. Grace smiled faintly. "One day you wake up and realize you're the only one still trying." He looked at her then, really looked. The dirt on her coat, the exhaustion beneath her skin, and yet the way her eyes softened every time she looked at her kids. It reminded him of his mother, working double shifts after his father died, pretending she wasn't tired so he wouldn't see. He blinked hard. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." Grace shrugged. "We do what we can." Her calm acceptance struck him deeper than any plea for help. He looked down at his untouched coffee, watching the steam fade. Maybe there's a way I can help." Grace shook her head gently. "You've done enough. Just letting them eat, that's more than most." But something inside him whispered that it wasn't enough. Not tonight. Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? Write yes and tell me their name. Maybe gratitude can travel further than we think. The clock hit midnight. The city outside had gone quiet, the world washed clean by rain. Ethan watched Grace carefully gather the children's leftovers into a napkin, tucking them into her bag. You don't have to go back out there, he said. That she hesitated at the door, her back to him. There's a shelter a few blocks away. They close at 1. If we hurry. He stood up. I'll drive you. Her head turned sharply. You don't need to. I want to. The driver's face tightened as they approached the car. Ethan could almost hear the judgment in his silence, but he didn't care. Grace slid into the back seat, holding both kids close. As they drove, she stared out the window, the passing lights reflecting in her eyes. Ethan found himself watching her through the rearview mirror, a stranger, yet someone whose pain felt familiar. The car stopped in front of the shelter. A faded sign hung crookedly. Hope Haven, beds full most nights. Grace sighed. If they're full again, we'll just wait outside till morning. Ethan stepped out before she could protest, walking up to the door. He spoke quietly with the attendant, then reached for his card. Moments later, the woman nodded and let them in. Grace turned to him, startled. What did you do? Paid for tonight, he said simply. And tomorrow? Her eyes shimmered. Why? He smiled faintly. Because I can. She opened her mouth to respond, but her voice caught. Instead, she just nodded, a silent thank you heavy with everything words couldn't hold. As the shelter door closed, Ethan stood outside in the drizzle, the echo of her gratitude following him back into the dark. Now it's your turn. Share one small good thing you did recently. Write it below so others remember that humanity still lives. Your story might light someone's path tonight. Asterisk. The next morning arrived in quiet gray. The city still wore its dampness like a second skin, sidewalks glistening, air heavy with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt. Ethan sat in his car, parked across from the shelter. The wipers moved in slow, steady arcs, like a heartbeat he didn't want to admit he was following. He had told himself he'd just check once, just to see if they were okay. But as the shelter door opened and Grace stepped out, carrying her daughter while holding Sam's hand, he didn't start the engine. He only watched. Grace's hair was still wet. Her clothes hadn't changed, yet she looked lighter. Maybe it was the breakfast the volunteers handed her kids, or maybe it was just relief, the fragile kind that comes from one night of safety. When Lily laughed, a small, bell-like sound that seemed to cut through the city noise, Ethan felt something shift again. He remembered that sound. It belonged to another life, one he hadn't let himself think about in years. He leaned back, eyes distant. 5 years ago, he had a daughter too. Her name was Emma. She was 7 when he lost her. A car accident, quick, merciless. His wife left 2 months later, unable to breathe in a house filled with ghost laughter. Ethan threw himself into business, building walls of glass and gold around a wound that never healed. Now, watching Grace kneel to tie her son's shoe on the wet pavement, it felt as if life had circled back, giving him a mirror of what he once had, but couldn't save. He got out of the car. Grace, he called softly. She turned, surprised. You're still here? He smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep. She hesitated, studying him. Why are you helping me? The question hit harder than it should have. He wanted to say something simple, because I want to, or because it's right. But the truth was heavier. Because someone once helped me, he said instead. And I never got the chance to thank them. Grace's eyes softened. She nodded slowly, as if she understood. They walked together down the block toward a small park. The kids ran ahead, chasing pigeons that scattered like scraps of silver. Grace sat on a bench, clutching her paper cup of coffee, her fingers trembling against the cold. I used to bring Emma here, Ethan murmured, more to himself. Emma? My daughter, he said quietly. She loved the swings. Grace didn't speak for a while. Then, gently, she said, You look like you still love her. He nodded. Every day, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of shared understanding to people from different worlds, both carrying ghosts of love that refused to fade. A breeze stirred fallen leaves around their feet. The city hummed in the distance, buses, horns, footsteps. Life went on. Grace exhaled, a trembling sigh. You know, people think losing money or homes is the worst, but it's losing dignity that really breaks you. Having your kids look up at you hungry, and you've got nothing left to give. Her voice cracked, but she forced a smile. That's when you stop feeling human. Ethan's throat tightened. Then let me help you feel human again. She frowned slightly. How I can find you a job. Somewhere safe, steady. I own a few businesses. You could start anywhere you're comfortable. Grace blinked, startled. You'd do that for me. For your kids, he said. They deserve to see their mother stand tall again. Tears glimmered in her eyes, falling before she could wipe them away. You don't even know me, Ethan smiled softly. Maybe not yet. Behind them, the children laughed, and for the first time, Grace let herself laugh to Dot. If that moment hit you hard, leave a. Sometimes one little symbol says what our hearts can't. 2 days later, Grace stood outside a bakery. Hazen Crumb, the sign read. Ethan had pulled some strings, convincing his manager to give her a chance. Inside, the air was warm and sweet, filled with the scent of vanilla and yeast. Grace watched the dough rise in the oven, her apron dusted with flour, her cheeks flushed from the heat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Lily sat on a stool in the corner, coloring on a napkin while Sam played with a toy car, the same broken one from that night, now glued back together with tape Ethan had bought. When the manager handed her the first paycheck, Grace stared at it like it was a promise written in ink. Her hands shook. I haven't held one of these in months. The manager smiled kindly. You earned it. Later, when Ethan came to check in, she met him outside. The evening sun cast long shadows across the street. I don't know how to thank you, she said. Don't, he replied. Just keep going. She smiled faintly. I will. As he walked back to his car, her voice stopped him. Ethan. He turned. You said someone helped you once. What did they do? He looked down, a small, sad smile tugging at his lips. They believed I could be better. When I didn't. Grace nodded slowly. Then maybe that's what you're doing for me. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The light softened around them, gold melting into dusk. To broken hearts, somehow finding rhythm in the same silence. Be honest, could you forgive after what they did? Type forgive if you could. Or never if it would break you too deeply. Asterisk days turned into weeks. The bakery became more than a job for Grace. It became her rhythm. Morning shifts at dawn, laughter with the other staff, small smiles exchanged with customers who didn't know her story. Each night, she returned to the small apartment Ethan had helped her rent, where Lily and Sam waited with drawings taped to the walls. Life was still fragile, but it was finally hers again. Ethan visited the shop often, pretending he came for coffee, though everyone knew he hated sweets. Grace teased him about it. You just like the smell, she'd say, brushing flour from her hands maybe. He'd reply with a half smile. Or maybe I like seeing someone who refused to quit. It became their quiet game. Soft banter that covered a growing connection neither dared to name. But every night, when Grace locked up and walked home beneath the streetlights, she felt something else following her, fear, not of strangers, but of her past, because broken things rarely stay buried. One evening, as she was wiping down the counters, the bell above the bakery door jingled. She turned, expecting Ethan, but froze. The man who walked in was thin, hollow-eyed, wearing the same smirk she remembered from nightmares. Grace, he said slowly, voice dripping with familiarity. Didn't think I'd find you. Her throat closed up. Mark. He grinned wider, revealing the teeth she'd once feared in anger, now yellowed with addiction. Heard you've been playing house with some rich guy. Must be nice, huh? Her hands trembled. You need to leave. He leaned across the counter. I just want to talk. Mark, please. The kids, what about them? He hissed, slamming his palm on the wood. They're my kids too. Grace's voice cracked. You left us. Mark's eyes darkened. You made me. Always nagging, always saying I wasn't enough. Look at you now, apron, flour, pretending you're better. He laughed bitterly. You're still just the same girl begging for scraps. Grace's chest tightened, but she stood her ground. I've changed. He smirked. No one really changes. They just hide better. The door opened again. Ethan's voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem here? Mark turned, his grin faltering when he saw Ethan. Oh, the hero. Ethan stepped closer. Calm but cold. You should leave, Mark chuckled. And who are you? Her new owner? Ethan's jaw clenched. I'm someone who won't let you hurt her again. The silence stretched thin, sharp as glass. Then Mark shrugged, feigning ease. Fine, but she knows I'll be back. Can't run forever, Gracie. When he finally left, the bell's echo seemed to tremble in the air. Grace collapsed into the nearest chair, her breath shaking. Ethan crouched beside her. Are you okay? She nodded weakly, tears spilling despite herself. I thought he was gone. Ethan looked toward the door, fury buried beneath his calm tone. He won't touch you again. Grace covered her face. You shouldn't have seen that. I'm glad I did, he said gently. You don't have to hide anymore. The words cracked something in her, not fear, but release. For the first time, she let herself cry freely, not as a mother, not as a survivor, but as someone finally seen. He didn't try to stop her tears. He just stayed, a silent anchor beside the storm. The next few days were tense. Grace jumped at every noise, checked the locks twice, walked her kids home faster. But through it all, Ethan stayed near, not hovering, just present. He started coming by earlier, making sure she wasn't alone. Sometimes he'd bring small things, groceries, books for the kids, a single flower tucked into a paper bag. Grace would roll her eyes, but secretly those gestures became her lighter still. She couldn't shake the fear. He's right, she whispered one evening as they closed the shop. Maybe no one really changes. Ethan turned to her. I did. She looked up. You. He nodded slowly. After I lost Emma, I thought the world ended. I became someone I didn't like. Cold, careless. But then, he hesitated, eyes softening. Then I met you. And your kids. And I realized, maybe broken doesn't mean finished. Grace's lip quivered. You really believe that? I have to, he said quietly. Otherwise, what's the point of surviving? She looked at him for a long moment, the streetlight catching the tear she didn't bother to wipe. If you believe love still wins, comment amen. Let's fill this section with hope. Maybe someone scrolling right now needs to see it. That night, Grace tucked her children into bed, kissed their foreheads, and sat by the window long after they slept. The city outside pulsed with life, distant sirens, laughter, wind brushing past the glass. She wrapped her arms around herself and whispered into the dark, "Thank you, Ethan." But as she drifted into sleep, a shadow moved near the curb, a figure leaning against the street lamp, cigarette glowing like a small, angry eye. Mark. He exhaled smoke into the night, his gaze fixed on the window above. The next morning came bright but brittle, the kind of sunlight that looks warm but feels cold. Grace woke up with a heaviness in her chest she couldn't explain. She made breakfast, tied Lily's hair into 2 small braids, and kissed Sam's cheek as he munched toast, pretending not to notice her shaking hands. Outside the window, the street looked ordinary. Too ordinary. Still, she checked twice before locking the door behind her. The walk to the bakery felt longer that day. Every footstep echoed, every shadow stretched a little too far. She told herself it was just nerves, that Mark had said empty threats before. But deep down, she knew that look in his eyes, the kind of anger that doesn't fade. It festers. When she reached the shop, Ethan was already there, sleeves rolled up, helping one of the bakers lift flour sacks. He turned when he saw her, smiling. "You're early. Couldn't sleep," she murmured, hanging her coat. He studied her face, then nodded quietly, understanding without asking. "Coffee, please." As the morning rush began, Grace tried to lose herself in the rhythm, the whir of mixers, the smell of cinnamon, the laughter of customers. For a few hours, she managed to pretend everything was normal. But around noon, the front door chimed again. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't Mark, just a stranger in a gray hoodie, ordering coffee to go. But the fear didn't fade. It clung to her like the scent of smoke. Ethan noticed. Between customers, he leaned toward her. "Grace, if he comes near you again, I want you to tell me, immediately. I don't want to drag you into this," she said quietly. "You already have," he replied, not unkindly. "And I'm not going anywhere. His tone was calm, but his eyes, those clear, steady eyes, made her believe him. That evening, as they closed up, he offered to walk her home. She refused at first, pride flickering stubbornly, but gave in when he said softly, "Please, for my peace of mind." They walked in silence, the city winding down around them. When they reached her building, Grace turned to him. "Ethan, why are you really doing all this? You don't owe me anything." He hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Maybe not, but maybe I owe the world something. For all the times I looked away when someone needed me." Grace blinked back sudden tears. "You're not the man you think you are, Ethan." He smiled faintly. "Neither are you, Grace. You're stronger than you realize." She wanted to answer, but the lump in her throat made words impossible. As he turned to leave, she whispered, "Good night." He looked back once more. "Good night, Grace." The next day was calm. To calm. By late afternoon, Ethan was in his office downtown, reviewing contracts, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. It buzzed again, this time, a message, unknown. "You think you can buy my family?" His blood ran cold. Before he could respond, another message followed, a photo. Grace, standing outside the bakery, smiling, unaware, Ethan's hand clenched around the phone. He grabbed his keys and left without a word. Back at the bakery, Grace was sweeping near the counter when she noticed the reflection in the glass door. A shadow outside, lingering too long. Her pulse quickened. "Ethan?" she whispered, but it wasn't him. The door swung open. Mark stepped inside, the smell of smoke and whiskey trailing behind him. "Miss me?" he sneered. Grace backed away. "You shouldn't be here," he laughed. "This your new world, huh? Smells like sugar and lies." Before she could reply, Ethan burst in. His eyes locked on Mark. "Get out," Mark smirked. "I was just saying hello." Ethan stepped forward, calm but dangerous. "You're not welcome here. Leave before I call the police." Mark's grin faltered, then returned. "You think you can scare me with money?" Ethan didn't blink. "No, just the truth. You had your chance, Mark. You walked away. Don't destroy what she's rebuilding." For a second, something flickered in Mark's expression. Guilt. Maybe, but it vanished fast. "She's still my wife," he spat. Grace's voice trembled. "Not anymore." Mark froze. "What did you say?" She stood taller this time, her fear replaced by quiet defiance. "You don't own me anymore." Mark's nostrils flared, but Ethan stepped between them before he could react. "You heard her." Mark's jaw tightened. "This isn't over." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the bell cracked against the frame. Grace's hands shook violently, the broom clattering to the floor. Ethan reached for her. "It's okay. He's gone." She pressed her face into his shoulder, sobbing. "He'll come back. I know he will." Ethan tightened his arms around her. "Then he'll find me waiting." Outside, night descended again, darker than before. Mark's car idled at the corner, cigarette glowing red in the shadows. His voice was a whisper to no one. "You think you can take her from me?" He flicked the cigarette into the street and drove off, leaving the echo of an unseen storm behind him. If this story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the soul who carried this pain and still stayed kind. One click can be your way of saying, "I felt you." The night after Mark's return hung heavy in the air, like the pause before thunder. Grace barely slept. Every creak of the floor, every hum of the wind sounded like footsteps outside her door. She kept the lights on until dawn, her body trembling from exhaustion. When morning came, she went through the motions: breakfast, school drop-off, work, but her smile was a fragile mask. Ethan noticed the hollowness in her eyes the moment she stepped into the bakery. "You didn't sleep," he said softly. She forced a smile. "Mothers don't sleep. We just rest our worries." He set a cup of tea in front of her. "Then let me carry one of them." Grace stared at him, her throat tightening. "You already carry too much." "Not the kind that matters," he said. Her lips trembled, but she nodded, wrapping her hands around the cup for warmth she couldn't feel. The day crawled by. Each time the doorbell chimed, Grace flinched. Ethan stayed close, pretending to check orders, but never straying far. By evening, when the last customer left, she leaned against the counter, exhausted. You should take the kids somewhere safe for a few days, Ethan said quietly. A hotel, maybe. I'll cover it. I can't keep running, she whispered. If I do, he'll always win. He looked at her, not as a savior, but as someone who understood what it meant to stand in ruins and still fight. Then we face it together. She met his eyes, something unspoken flickering there. Why do you care so much? Because I lost everything once, he said. And I swore I'd never watch someone else lose theirs if I could stop it. Before she could answer, the door burst open. The sound, that violent crack of wood and metal, froze the air. Grace turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Mark. He stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his jacket, eyes wild and bloodshot. His voice was low, dangerous. You called the cops on me. Grace shook her head. No, liar. He slammed the door shut behind him, locking it. You think you can hide behind him? He pointed at Ethan. Ethan stepped forward. Mark, don't do this. Mark's laughter was jagged. You think money makes you her protector? You think she loves you? Enough, Ethan said, voice calm but firm. You need to leave. Mark's gaze darted around the room, landing on a metal tray by the counter. He grabbed it and hurled it to the floor, the sound shattering through the silence. Grace screamed, pulling back instinctively. Ethan moved between them. Mark, she's mine. Mark shouted, tears mixing with rage. She was supposed to be mine. Then why did you leave her hungry? Ethan snapped. Why did you leave your kids cold? The words hit like a punch. For a split second, Mark froze, chest heaving, eyes glassy with something close to guilt. But it twisted quickly back into anger. You don't get to judge me, he hissed. You're just another rich man trying to buy redemption. Ethan's voice softened. Maybe, but at least I'm trying. That broke him. Mark lunged forward, shoving Ethan hard against the wall. Grace screamed his name, but before she could reach them, Ethan caught Mark's wrist mid-swing. The struggle was brutal, desperate, two broken men colliding in the wreckage of their choices. Then, as suddenly as it began, Mark stumbled back, clutching his arm. Ethan didn't hit him. He just looked at him, breathless and steady. Go home, Mark. You're not the enemy you're fighting. It's yourself. The words hung heavy. For a heartbeat, Mark's expression cracked, rage melting into confusion, then despair. He turned toward Grace. I just wanted my family. Tears streamed down her face. Then you should have stayed when we needed you. Something in him broke completely. He staggered toward the door, hands shaking, and left. The sound of the rain swallowed the silence that followed. Grace collapsed into a chair, trembling. Ethan knelt beside her, his own hands shaking now. It's over, he whispered, but she didn't answer. She was staring at the floor, tears dripping silently onto her apron. It'll never really be over, she said. Not for people like us. Ethan wanted to argue, but he couldn't. He knew she was right. Some ghosts never leave. They just learn to sit quietly in the corners of your peace. He reached out and took her hand. Then maybe peace isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about surviving. Together, Grace met his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look afraid. Her voice was barely a whisper. Together, the word lingered, soft but powerful. The sound of two fractured souls finding their rhythm in the ruins. If you've ever carried pain that the world couldn't see, remember this, your story isn't over. Someone out there still believes in second chances. Leave if you do to. Days passed with a strange calm. The police had found Mark's car abandoned near the river. No sign of him. Just an empty pack of cigarettes and a half-torn photo, Grace and the kids from years ago. The officer told her he was probably gone for good, but Grace didn't know what gone meant anymore. Sometimes gone meant peace. Sometimes it meant something waiting to return. Ethan kept checking in, though less now. Not because he cared less, but because he wanted her to stand on her own again. He understood that part of healing was distance, letting someone find their strength without leaning too hard on yours. One afternoon, the bakery was quiet. The usual hum of chatter had faded, replaced by the low sound of rain against the windows. Grace stood by the counter, wiping it clean even though it was already spotless. Her mind kept drifting, to Mark's face, to Ethan's arms around her, to the ache of almost losing everything again. When the doorbell chimed, she turned, expecting a customer. Instead, it was Ethan, "You look better," he said, a small smile on his lips. "Better than terrified." She teased lightly. "Better than broken," he replied. She set the rag down, leaning against the counter. "I don't know if I'm fixed yet," Ethan chuckled softly. "Maybe people aren't meant to be fixed. Maybe we're meant to be changed." Grace studied him, her eyes gentle but searching. "You talk like a man who's forgiven the world." He looked down, a ghost of sadness crossing his face. "I'm still working on forgiving myself." Her expression softened. "For what?" He hesitated, then said, "The night Emma died. I was supposed to pick her up from school. I got stuck in a meeting. She took the bus instead." His voice cracked just slightly, like an old wound reopening. "The driver didn't see the truck." Grace's breath hitched. "Ethan." He nodded, forcing a small, pained smile. "Everyone told me it wasn't my fault. But when you're a parent, that word means nothing. Every breath after that feels borrowed." Tears filled her eyes, not out of pity, but connection. "You've carried that alone for too long." He met her gaze. "So have you." For a long moment, they just stood there. Two souls wrapped in the same kind of quiet sorrow, different stories, same ache. Then Grace reached across the counter and took his hand. "Maybe that's what forgiveness is," she whispered. "Not forgetting, but finding someone who understands the weight." Ethan's eyes glistened. "Then I forgive you," he said softly. She frowned slightly. "For what?" "For surviving," he said. "Even when the world tried to convince you not to." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She squeezed his hand tighter. "Then I forgive you too. Be honest. Could you forgive after what they did? Type forgive if you could. Or never if it would break you too deeply." After that day, things began to change in small, steady ways. Grace no longer flinched when the doorbell chimed. She started singing again while baking, her voice soft and imperfect, but real. The customers noticed too. Her laughter came easier, her eyes brighter. She even convinced Ethan to try a cupcake, which he hated every bite of, but pretended to love. Lily and Sam adored him now. They'd race to the door whenever he visited, shouting Uncle Ethan. Even though he'd insist, "Just Ethan is fine," he'd laugh anyway, letting them win every argument. One Saturday afternoon, Grace found him outside fixing Sam's toy car with a small screwdriver. The boy's brow furrowed in concentration as Ethan guided his hands. "See?" Ethan said. "Everything can be repaired if you take your time." Grace leaned on the doorway, watching, something warm blooming in her chest. It wasn't the kind of love that burned fast and bright. It was the kind that healed, that rebuilt. When their eyes met, neither spoke, but the silence between them said everything. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, Grace took a deep breath. "Ethan." He looked up. "I think I'm ready to stop surviving." He tilted his head. "And start what?" She smiled faintly. "Living, for the first time in a long time." Ethan laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that made Grace join in, her heart lighter than she remembered it could be. That night, Grace wrote a letter. She didn't plan to send it, not to Mark, not to anyone, just to herself. "Dear Grace, you are not what he did to you. You are what you did after. You are the hands that kept holding, the voice that kept whispering to your children when the world went silent. You are still here, and that is everything." She folded the note, placed it inside her old coat pocket, and smiled through tears. "If you believe love still wins, comment amen. Let's fill this section with hope. Maybe someone scrolling right now needs to see it." The seasons began to shift. The first hints of spring crept into the city. Softer winds, longer days, sunlight that didn't hide behind clouds. Grace felt it in the air every morning she opened the bakery, the scent of yeast and sugar mingling with the promise of something new. It had been nearly 3 months since that night. Mark hadn't returned. The police closed the file. The shadows had loosened their grip, leaving room for something gentler, peace. Ethan stopped by less frequently now, but not because they'd grown apart. In fact, it was the opposite. The space between them had turned comfortable, filled with quiet trust, with the kind of unspoken understanding that doesn't need constant proof. One morning, as Grace arranged pastries in the display case, she noticed something on the counter, a small envelope with her name written in Ethan's neat handwriting. Inside was a single note. "You once said you couldn't imagine what a future looks like. Come see it for yourself." Below was an address. Grace frowned, curiosity blooming into warmth. That evening, after locking up and tucking her kids into bed at a neighbor's, she followed the address. It led her across town to a narrow street lined with trees in early bloom. At the end stood a modest building, freshly painted, with a sign that read, "The Haven House, Shelter for Women and Children." Ethan stood outside, hands in his pockets, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. Grace approached slowly. "What is this?" He turned to her, eyes reflecting the warm glow of the porch light. "A beginning," he said simply. She blinked, realization dawning. "You did this." "We did this," he corrected. "I used my name, but it's your story that built it." Grace looked up at the sign, tears forming instantly. "You built a shelter?" "I built a home for people who need one," he said. "For women like you, who just need one person to believe in them long enough to start again." She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "Ethan, this is yours," he said softly. "If you want it, you can manage it, run it. You know better than anyone what these women need." Her tears spilled freely now. "I don't know if I can." "You already did," he interrupted gently. "Every day you got up, every time you smiled through fear. You've been building this without realizing it." Grace laughed through her tears, the sound trembling with disbelief. "I don't deserve this," Ethan smiled. "That's exactly why you do." She looked up at the glowing sign again, her heart pounding with something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Slowly, she turned to him. "Thank you. You don't owe me that," he said. "Just promise me one thing. When someone walks through those doors scared and alone, you'll remind them what you forgot once." "What's that?" "That hope still lives here." Her voice broke. "I promise." They stood there for a while, side by side under the soft streetlight, the world quiet except for the sound of the wind brushing through early blossoms. For the first time, Grace wasn't looking back. She was looking forward. A week later, the Haven House opened. Grace had spent every waking hour preparing it, painting walls, folding linens, arranging books, and hanging drawings Lily and Sam made in the front hallway. The children ran through the halls laughing, their joy echoing off the walls that once held silence. On the first morning, a woman and her daughter arrived. The woman's eyes were wary, her hands trembling as she clutched her bag. Grace smiled gently, stepping forward. "Hi," she said. "I'm Grace. You're safe now." The woman blinked, tears forming. "Safe?" Grace nodded, holding out her hand. "Yes, safe." It was the same word she once needed to hear. And now, saying it felt like reclaiming every broken part of herself. Later, as the day faded, Ethan stopped by. He found Grace sitting on the steps outside, watching the sunset melt gold into the horizon. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like I finally exhaled," she said softly. "For the first time in years." He smiled. "You did good, Grace." She turned to him, eyes shining. "We both did." The sun dipped lower, painting everything in shades of orange and rose. It was the kind of evening that made pain feel like something far away, something that no longer defined who they were. Ethan looked at her, and for a brief, perfect moment, the air between them felt like peace itself. If you believe love still wins, comment amen. Let's fill this section with hope. Maybe someone scrolling right now needs to see it. Asterisk. A year passed. Seasons rolled by like soft pages, and the Haven House became a living heartbeat in the city. Laughter in the mornings, stories at night, walls that held more hope than sorrow. Grace stood at its door every day, greeting new faces, some broken, some brave, all searching for the same thing she once did, a place to start again. Ethan still visited often, though less as a benefactor now and more as a friend, someone who belonged. The world had softened around them, healing both of them in quiet, unnoticed ways. One morning, as Grace walked through the hallways checking rooms, she heard a sound from the kitchen, giggles, clattering plates, and Ethan's unmistakable voice saying, "I swear, I followed the recipe." She peeked in and burst out laughing. He stood there, covered in flour, surrounded by half-burnt pancakes, while two little girls, one of them Lily, tried to coach him. "You're supposed to flip it faster," Lily shouted, laughing. "I did," he protested, waving the spatula helplessly. Grace leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You're a millionaire, Ethan. Maybe stick to what you're good at." He grinned sheepishly. Building shelters, not breakfasts. Got it. The laughter that followed filled the room like sunlight. Grace watched him, her heart full in a way she hadn't thought possible. Not the dizzying kind of love that sweeps you away, but the kind that stays, gentle and sure. After breakfast, as the children ran outside to play, Ethan wiped his hands and turned to her. "You know," he said, "I think Emma would have liked this place." Grace's voice softened. "I think she'd be proud of you." He nodded slowly. "Maybe she already forgave me. Maybe I just needed to forgive myself to feel it." Grace reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You did more than forgive yourself, Ethan. You gave hundreds of people a reason to hope again." He smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone." Outside, the laughter of children echoed through the courtyard, a sound neither of them would ever tire of hearing. Grace looked around, the blooming flowers, the painted walls, the photos of families who had come and gone. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think life broke us to punish us. Now I think maybe it breaks us to open room for something bigger." Ethan looked at her, sunlight glinting in his eyes. "Like what?" "Like love," she said. "The kind that heals instead of hurts." He nodded, his voice low. "Then maybe we were both broken for the right reason." They stood there in silence, side by side, watching the world they'd rebuilt, one small act of kindness at a time. Later that evening, Grace sat by her office window, journal open. She'd gotten into the habit of writing before bed, not about pain, but gratitude or today. A mother arrived with her 2 children. "I saw the same fear I once carried." I told her she was safe, and I meant it. I didn't know words could feel like miracles until I said them. She paused, her pen hovering. Then she wrote, "Ethan came by again. He pretends he doesn't like pancakes, but he smiles every time the kids ask for them." Maybe love isn't about saying it. Maybe it's just showing up. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Ethan stepped in, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Peace offering for the critic who mocked my cooking," he said with a grin. She chuckled, taking the cup. "You're learning." He sat across from her, his expression softening. "Grace, thank you for reminding me that broken doesn't mean over." She smiled gently. "And thank you for showing me that kindness isn't weakness. It's courage in disguise." They raised their cups in quiet toast. Steam curled between them, carrying warmth that went deeper than the tea. A warmth born from every scar that had finally learned to rest. Outside, the world was alive, children laughing, the city glowing, the sky painted in fading pink. Grace watched it all and whispered, "We made it." Ethan nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "We did." And for the first time, neither of them needed to look back. If this story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the soul who carried this pain and still stayed kind. One click can be your way of saying, "I felt you." The world may never know how a single night of rain stitched 2 broken lives together. But in a city of noise, there now stood a small house called Haven, where pain became purpose and love, quietly, stubbornly won.